Hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation on IFR departures for the EASA and UK instrument rating. So what we're going to have a look at today, we will start with having a look at some standard instrument departures. We'll move on to omnidirectional departures, then talk about IFR departures outside controlled airspace, and lastly, we'll cover some rules and regulations that you need to know about IFR departures. Just a little bit about me before we get started. So I'm an active single-engine and multi-engine pilot. I fly both piston and turbine aeroplanes. I'm a CPL and IR instructor and examiner, and I do all of that for both EASA and UK licenses. I find there's quite a gap between what people learn for the ATPL exams and what they need to know when they turn up to start their instrument rating course. So ultimately, that's what's led to me doing this presentation and some future ones as well. So starting with standard instrument departures then. So generally speaking, standard instrument departures are a procedure that you can find. We've got an example here on the right, standard instrument departures out of Heraklion in Greece. There's a handful of them there, but they all pretty much boil down to taking off and making a turn to intercept a radial away from that VOR, the India Romeo Alpha VOR that's on the airport, and then intercepting and tracking a radial. So although they're simple though, we do need to be sure to look over any notes and warnings that are on the plate, because there's often ones that will catch you out. So this is a good example of that, where we can see here, all these SIDs say they require a minimum visibility of 10 kilometers and a ceiling of 2,000 feet. And during the initial climb, you must remain in visual contact with terrain and maintain your own terrain separation until passing 2,000 feet. Which effectively means that although this is an IFR departure, if you're going to fly any of them, you need VFR weather. Another thing to be aware of with standard instrument departures that plenty of students seem to miss when they're first getting their head around these is that you must compensate for the wind when you're flying any tracks or bearings. So if we take a look at the first departure on this plate here, which is that one marked with the orange line there on the plate, the Apollo 1 Quebec departure, which says turn left as soon as possible, 290-degree track, then intercept the India Romeo Alpha radial 335 to Apollo, and then join the airway Mike 749. The bit there that's in the middle instruction that says 290-degree track. So that is a track and not a heading, so you do need to compensate for any wind. So if you had a wind from the left, you'd need to be slightly left of 290 degrees, and if you had a wind from the right, your heading would need to be slightly right of 290 degrees. That's pretty much it for standard instrument departures. There's not a lot to them beyond that, really. So the next type of departure that we come across when we're flying IFR are omnidirectional departures. So these normally exist where a SID is not published, so they make an omnidirectional departure instead, like this example here on the right in the Pyrenees in France. And the general idea behind all omnidirectional departures is that you will maintain the runway direction until you reach a height or a distance at which you can safely turn in any direction and maintain your obstacle clearance. So using this example here on the right, then we can see for runway 13, the routing on the bottom there says climb on 125-degree track to D2.0, the Papa Yankee Romeo, then turn left to the first en route fix of your clearance. So essentially what they're saying is you've got to climb straight ahead. Once you're 2 miles from the airport, it's then safe for you to turn left in any direction, flying to whatever your first waypoint on your flight plan is. And these often get published at airports where maybe there's no suitable nav aid that allows the authority to create a SID, or at airports that just aren't busy enough to warrant having standard instrument departures designed for that particular airport. Omnidirectional departures, they may also sometimes specify certain sectors to be avoided. So they might say something like avoid the sector from radial 180 to radial 270 because there's high terrain in that one sector. And if you do ever get ones that simply say climb straight ahead, don't give you an altitude or a distance that you need to reach, and they just say turn left to your first en route waypoint or something similar. Then we need to know that all IFR departures assume a straight climb to at least 120 meters, which for our purposes we can just round to 400 feet. So all IFR departures, you're always going to need to climb straight ahead to at least 400 feet above the aerodrome level. So that's omnidirectional departures. And the third departure we're going to look at is IFR departures outside of controlled airspace. So some of you are going to be doing your instrument ratings from airports that are uncontrolled. And if you are, there's two major differences for you when you're compared to departing a controlled aerodrome. So generally speaking, there's no published IFR departure procedures from uncontrolled airports. And secondly, there's no facility on the ground for you to be able to activate your IFR flight plan or for you to receive an IFR clearance on the ground before your departure. Ultimately, this does vary a bit from country to country. So as you're going through your instrument rating course, you'll become more and more familiar with the procedures at your particular aerodrome. But we'll cover some of the main ones here anyway. So the first issue that we've got is there's no published IFR departures. So ultimately, what you must do is it is your responsibility to ensure that the ceiling and visibility will permit you to clear any obstacles visually. So in reality, what you're doing here really is you're initially departing VFR, and then once you're airborne, you're becoming IFR at some point. So it's during that VFR portion initially at first after takeoff where you need to be able to visually avoid any obstacles or terrain. And the second problem we've got with IFR flights outside controlled airspace was that there's no way for you to activate an IFR flight plan and receive your IFR clearance before your departure. And this is where we start to see a lot more differences between country to country, and sometimes even plenty of differences between airfields that are within the same country. So many countries will allow you to file an IFR flight plan from an uncontrolled airport, but some countries won't. So notably Spain and Germany, if you try to put IFR into Section 8 of the flight plan for your flight rules, if you're departing from an uncontrolled or arriving at an uncontrolled aerodrome, some countries will just outright reject that IFR flight plan. So in that case, if you can't file an IFR flight plan, you'll need to file either a Yankee or a Zulu flight plan. So Yankee being IFR converting to VFR, or Zulu being VFR converting to IFR. Ultimately, this really becomes a bit of a process of trial and error. So initially try to file an IFR flight plan. If it's accepted, great, off you go. But if you've tried to file an IFR flight plan and it gets rejected, then try either a Yankee or a Zulu flight plan. And keep in mind that if you do file an IFR flight plan to or from an uncontrolled airfield, you can always cancel your IFR flight plan once you're airborne, and you can proceed to your destination VFR. So just because you're flying to a uncontrolled airport with an IFR flight plan doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have some kind of IFR procedure to arrive on, because there probably won't be any at uncontrolled airports. So in that case, you just cancel your IFR flight plan while you're airborne, and you would land VFR. So once we've got an airborne, how do we activate our IFR flight plan? Because there's no way of activating it. Generally speaking, there's no way of activating it on the ground before your departure. So once you're airborne, you'll need to activate your IFR flight plan, and you'll need some way of getting a clearance to enter controlled airspace as well. So the options here, really, the main one is to contact the Area Flight Information Service. So this would be like Budapest information or London information, whoever's the flight information service for the area that you're flying within. They can access the flight plan if you failed it. They can activate it for you, and they can usually negotiate with whoever is the first controlling agency along your route to negotiate a airways clearance or controlled airspace entry clearance for you. You can also pick up the telephone and ring either the area flight information service or the first controlling air traffic service unit that's along your route. It's very unlikely in Europe, nearly impossible in Europe, that you'd ever get a SCORT code or a controlled airspace clearance over the phone before you're airborne. But picking up the phone and ringing them can always be a good idea, because you can either get some information from them about who the best person to contact on the radio once you are airborne is to activate your flight plan, or they might just get things ready on their end for once you are airborne, so that you can, when you do contact them on the radio, they've got a strip in front of them and they're ready to give you to activate your flight plan and give you a clearance quite quickly after you first contact them. And the third option is if you're departing from an aerodrome that has an aerodrome flight information service or an air-ground communication service, they may be able to coordinate activating your flight plan and coordinate a clearance into controlled airspace for you as well. Like we say, this varies a lot from country to country and from one aerodrome to the next. So again, the best thing you can do is, if you're departing an aerodrome that's got one of these services, is to pick up the phone before your departure, ring them up and ask them what they can offer you. One last thing that's worth mentioning before we move on to the rules and regulations is that unless if your flight is wholly outside controlled airspace, if you're flying from one uncontrolled airport to another and you're not going to enter controlled airspace at any point along the route, then ultimately there is no need for you to obtain a clearance to enter controlled airspace. Right then, our last topic for today, we're going to have a little look at some of the rules and regulations that you need to know surrounding IFR departures. So ultimately, these fall into two categories: the rules and regulations. We have departure minima, so what weather minima you need to be able to depart IFR. And secondly, departure alternate. So when's the departure alternate required, and which aerodromes can you use as a departure alternate? Before we dive into that, though, we'll just have a quick recap on the difference between visibility and RVR, because we find both of these being used for minima throughout the IR course. Sometimes your weather minima might be a visibility, sometimes it might be an RVR, sometimes it might be a cloud ceiling. And a lot of students don't fully understand the difference between a visibility and an RVR. The visibility is quite, well, in simple terms, visibility is the distance at which an object can be seen. So you can imagine this as somebody in the control tower looking out the window, and if there's a building or a tree or a hill, and they know that that feature is 7 kilometers away, if they can see it out the window, then they know that the visibility is at least 7 kilometers. So it's just what distance you can see any object at, essentially. Compared to runway visual range, or the RVR, which is a much more precise measurement. And so the RVR is the distance at which a pilot who's on the runway centerline can see the runway lights. Runway lights are obviously specially designed, very bright lights. So if you're stood on the center line of the runway, you'd expect to be able to see the runway lights from a further distance than you can see that tree or building or whatever you were looking at out of the control tower. So for that reason, almost always you would expect the RVR to be a greater distance than the visibility. That said, if you haven't got an RVR reported, but your minima is stated in terms of RVR, we can use this table here to convert an RVR to convert a visibility to an RVR. So looking at the first row of this table here, so assuming the airport has high intensity approach and runway lighting, then we can take the reported visibility. During the day, we can multiply it by 1.5, and at night, we can multiply it by 2. and we can use that as an effective RVR. So if RVR is stated in terms, or if our minima is stated in terms of RVR, we can take the visibility, multiply it by whatever factor this table says, and we can use that as our RVR value. Okay, moving on to departure minima then. So the question here then is, what is the worst weather that you can depart in? So for the single pilot instrument rating without further training, the answer there is a 400 meter RVR. So you're never going to be able to take off in anything less than a 400 meter RVR. If we do dig into the regulations a little bit more though, we come up with this table here, which gives us a few more criteria. So we can see there on the bottom row, yes, we can use a 400 meter RVR. During the day, to use that, we require either runway edge lights or runway centerline lights or markings. And at night, we require runway end lights and either runway edge lights or runway centerline lights. So if you've got those facilities, then you can use a departure minima of 400 meter RVR. However, if you haven't got those facilities, then we can only depart during the day, and the IFR departure minima then gets increased to 500 meters. It's worth noting here that we can depart with 400 meter RVR. This departure minima does not consider the cloud, so it doesn't state a cloud base, it doesn't state a cloud ceiling that we require for departure. We only require 400 meter RVR. So it could be overcast at 100 feet, doesn't matter for departure, we can still take off. The problem with that is if it was overcast at 100 feet and if the RVR was 400 meters, then we would not be able to land back at that airport because that's higher than any of our single pilot IFR approach minima. So in other words, this minimum departure RVR of 400 meters is lower than the minimum approach RVR. So therefore, it might be possible for you to take off from an aerodrome but not land back at that aerodrome. And so that leads us into departure alternates. So the first question here then is, when do we need a departure alternate? Quite simply, you need a departure alternate whenever you can't land back at your departure airport. That could be due to the weather, as we've just talked about, or it could be due to performance limitations. So you might have an aerodrome that's got a displaced threshold, so you've got a longer distance that you can use for takeoff. So your takeoff distance available, because you can use the entire runway, might be much longer than your landing distance available because of the displaced threshold. So we can't land back at our departure airport, which means we need a different airport to nominate as our departure alternate. So when we're looking for a departure alternate, what do we need to consider? So what are our requirements for nominating a certain airport as our departure alternate? There's two things to be aware of here. So firstly, assuming you're flying a multi-engine aeroplane, then your departure alternate must be within 1 hour at your one engine inoperative cruise speed. So this is assuming the worst case scenario of you've taken off, you have an engine failure, you need somewhere to land, but you can't land back at your departure airport, so your departure alternate needs to be within 1 hour at your now single engine cruise speed. And the second requirement for a departure alternate is the TAF at that aerodrome must indicate that the weather will be above the approach minima at your ETA plus or minus 1 hour. So again, assuming the worst case scenario, you take off, you have an engine failure, and you once you've sorted everything out, you're going to fly direct to your departure alternate. The time that you're going to get there, whatever your estimated time of arrival is, plus or minus 1 hour, then all the weather reports and forecasts must say that you will be able to fly an approach and become visual at your approach minima and land. So that's it for the rules and regulations for departures, really. So the last thing we'll cover here is what might your examiner ask you on test day about your departures. So a lot of the questions here will be about the rules and regulations. When can you depart? When do you need departure alternates, etc. So you might be asked, what's the worst weather you could take off in? Well, as we've just talked about, the worst weather you could possibly take off in with your single pilot instrument rating is a 400 meter RVR. When do you need a departure alternate? Well, you need a departure alternate when you can't land back at your departure aerodrome. And when you're choosing a departure alternate, what would you consider? As we've just said, it must be within 1 hour at your one engine operative cruise speed, and the TAF at the ETA plus or minus 1 hour must indicate the weather will be above your approach minima at that airport. Beyond that, the other questions you might get asked will just be practical questions about how you intend to fly this approach, so that your examiner might ask you to talk them through how you're going to fly this departure. So you can say, I'm going to take off, I need to fly straight ahead to D 2.0, then I'm going to turn left to my first en route waypoint. You could also be asked, say you're flying an omnidirectional departure, they might ask you, what height will you turn for your given departure? Just practical things about how you're going to fly that departure on test day. So that's everything really with IFR departures. This is quite a short topic. Some of our future topics that we'll make some videos on become a bit more involved and a bit longer, so we'll have some longer presentations for you. But for those of you that don't want to wait for the presentations, we have developed an instrument rating online preparation course. So the idea behind this is that it teaches you everything that you should know before you start your EASA or your UK instrument rating. And a lot of that the ATPLs won't have taught you, unfortunately. So our online course, you can access it at clearflight.co.uk. It looks a little something like this. And I'll just flick over so we can have a bit more of a look into it. So here's that same page on hold entries. We can see here, so this is just one lesson. You can see all the different lessons down the left-hand side here through all the different sections. If we have a look at this whole entries one, we scroll down, it talks about how to know which entry you're going to fly. It talks through each of the 3 hold entries, how you would fly each one, the offset entry, there's the direct entry, etc. At the end of each section, we've then got a quiz that you can do that covers some of the most common examiner questions that you'll be asked, and it also revises a bit of the knowledge that you should have learned in that section. So for this whole section here, we can see as an example, we've got 10 different questions there, all about holding patterns and procedures. For example, which the below is an example of a correct radio call when entering a hold. So first one there is the correct answer, Delta Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta entering the Lima Mike Zulu hold flight level 60. We can check whether or not we're right, click that button. Tell us if we're correct. We get a bit of an explanation of what's relevant to that question. If you want to dive into a bit more information about the topic that this question was about, because you can't remember, we've got related lessons down the bottom here, so we can click on that, radio calls in the hold, and that will take us to the radio calls in the hold lesson. So that's the online course. We can see it talks through each section of your IFR skills test and everything you need to know. It's got a bit of an introduction, IFR flight planning, departures, airways and arrivals, holding patterns, approaches, and GNSS systems. So that's our presentation. So thanks everybody for coming. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me. We've got the live chat going at the moment, haven't we? We've also got our website info. You can contact us at info@clearflight.co.uk if you've got any questions. Or there's a contact form on the website, clearflight.co.uk. I'll put this presentation up on the YouTube channel for anybody that wants to revise it, watch it again. And there's also a few more videos. We've got a few more coming up. The next video that I'm planning on releasing, hopefully sometime next week, is again about standard instrument departures. So it will talk through an example, and then we've got a video of me flying the standard instrument departure as well. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I hope this has been useful, and I'll see you at the next webinar.